Right. Hey everyone, this is Jenny Ponsurik, and I am here with Brittany. And Brittany is going to talk to us a little bit today about interviewing school psychologists. So, Brittany, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Brittany Kovac. I am currently serving as the lead school psychologist for my district in Fort Mill, South Carolina, or a little suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. I am also a school psychologist at the elementary level. I've been working in the South since 2011, and prior to that, I did my undergrad and graduate work at the University of Albany up in Albany, New York.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, so we're talking about interviewing school psychologists, and I know for a lot of school districts that first step is the paper screening process. And
Yes.
so I don't know about you, but I've had some years where we have like 5 applicants, and I've had instances where we have like 100 applicants. And so that paper screening process can be like really different sometimes, obviously, depending on how many applicants you're getting. When you've been a part of that process, what are some things that like people are looking for when literally all we're looking at is pieces of paper? Like, how does someone actually like stand out from all these other applicants?
Yeah. I would say, of course, what we're looking for first is number of years of experience. If you're coming right out of grad school, obviously you won't have as many years, but that doesn't mean that you can't stand out on your resume or your application. I'm also looking at your breadth of experience. So, have you worked with children in other roles beyond school psychology, whether you worked as a substitute teacher for a few years or you served as a teaching assistant, did work in the private setting through behavior intervention or early intervention, or if you just worked as a camp counselor or coached children in sports. I just like to see a variety of ways that you've worked with children, just to have a better idea of what your experience and perceptions might be, you bringing into the role. Um, I'm also looking at history of your professional development opportunities, any certifications that you might have received through internship, such as maybe having your BCBA, going through prepare training, being CPI trained, just any of those certifications or training experiences that you'll be bringing with you. Um, and then I touched on this a little bit, but I like to get a better idea of just who you are and what your interests are. So, especially if you're coming from grad school, if you have experience outside of the school psychology profession, such as organizations or clubs that you participated in during your undergrad or grad work, if you have a history of playing or coaching sports, volunteer work that you do, just give me an idea of who you are because, again, all of those experiences are going to come with you into your vision and your work as a school psychologist.
So I'm curious because I've had this happen sometimes with the paper screening experience where we actually find a lot of like grammar errors or a lot of spelling errors. And I don't know about you, but those kind of like stick out in my mind. Like I feel like this is like that first look at like look at me for a district, especially in a role like as a school psychologist where we write so much.
Yes.
So I'm kind of curious, do you ever take a look at those kind of pieces as well when you're looking at, resumes and those letters of introduction and different things like that?
Yes, we do. And you'd be surprised at some of the errors that people make in such a high stakes um, piece of writing. It does make an impression. If you're making silly errors in capitalization, punctuation, grammar, it does stick out a bit. Again, it's not a game changer or automatically make us put your resume at the bottom of the pile, but it kind of gives you an indication of maybe your level of detail and thoroughness in completing some of your paperwork because we know paperwork's a big important part of our job in some ways. So and I laughed a little bit when you mentioned that because we did have an applicant last year who submitted his application and everything was lowercase. There was not one capital letter in the entire application, including his own name. And so we fondly referred to him as lowercase Dan. and that is who he came to be for us, was lowercase Dan. So it does,
I've never
it does
seen that
impact.
other than, who was that? Like E. E. Cummings or something? There was like a poet who used to write everything in lowercase.
Yes,
I don't think I've ever seen that. That is pretty
yes.
amazing.
So lowercase Dan will forever be in my heart.
I just always feel like this is that time to like get other people in your world to double check your work, right? Because we can reread, just like our own psych reports, right? We can reread it 100 times and we don't see our own errors.
Mhm.
But to have those other people in our lives just to double check some of those things, as well as, I mean, there's so many things nowadays like Grammarly and different things like that that we can easily, access to just double check some of these things for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend having someone review your resume, and just get feedback, even if it's not just editing for mistakes, just getting feedback on how this resume is portraying you as a professional.
I remember working with an administrative assistant. She was always big on parallel construction, which is like if we have a bunch of bullet points that they're all verbs and they're all in the same tense. And, once you start working with some of
Mhm.
those people, all of a sudden, like that's the first thing I'm like looking for too. And all these different things. So I always have someone else review some of those like really important things.
Yeah.
And I like to have someone who's not in our field as well, because then I like to see like someone else who's like not used to some of our terminology. Like, does this even make sense to somebody
Yeah,
else outside our field?
that's a great point.
All right, so now let's move on to actually interviewing somebody. And I know nowadays it's different because obviously our interviews are over Zoom. And so it's kind of hard to get that personal feel from a lot of different people. It's a little bit more awkward because of all the technology and different things like that. But I'm kind of curious, what are some of the typical questions that you and your team are asking for a school psychologist position?
We have a standard set of questions that we use for our school psychology candidates. Um, One question is, what is your view of the role of a school psychologist? And here I'm really trying to get a feel for what you're interested in, what you take on as important, because obviously as school psychologists, we wear lots of hats. And so there's different areas that we might specialize in or gravitate towards. So I want to know what that is for you. Um, so that's a big question for me, what your role is. We also ask questions regarding evaluation processes. So if you're looking at a variety of classifications, what assessments you might administer, what data you're looking for, and then how you're analyzing all those findings to determine whether or not a student is eligible. Um, we ask questions about how you may handle disagreement or conflict amongst team members. Oftentimes, we are involved in some of those more challenging situations and conversations. And so, just looking at how you would navigate that, both on a professional and personal level, because that will be an important part of your work within the school setting. Um, the school psychologists in my district work closely with students that have 504 plans. So in our district, we are asking questions about your understanding of Section 504, your involvement in evaluations and development of plans, just to get an idea of how much training you may or may not need once you join our district. And then we also ask questions about history and experience with MTSS and the role that you've served in your school's MTSS teams, in particular, how you're supporting students on the SEL side of MTSS, um, and your interest in being involved in that further. Um, and then lastly, we ask questions about your experience handling crisis situations, whether or not you've been trained in a specific school-wide or district-wide crisis protocol, such as Prepare. If you have experience doing suicidal ideation assessments and threat assessments. At the secondary levels, we also ask a question about your experience in manifestation determinations. Whereas at elementary level, that's not typically something that you would need any experience in.
And I love how so many of your questions had so many different pieces of our job. One of the things I always tell people who are interviewing is listen for the questions. Because I mean, you went from, assessment to 504 to crisis. And so you can tell what some of those expectations are versus when you go to a district and every single question is about assessment. And then you can realize, that's pretty much all they're going to ask me to do here in this district, because that's what every single question is about. So.
Yeah, that's such a good point because, as I said, we're trained in so many hats, but district to district and school to school, the day-to-day expectations for school psychologists can vary widely. So that's a great point to listen to what the questions are asking, because that does give you a view of what the role generally is for the school psychologists in that placement. And here, obviously, we do it all.
Yes, I could tell.
It's wonderful. I love it. But yes, we are involved in a lot of different processes in our district. So we want to just get an idea of your experience in all of those areas.
And we were talking a little bit before the recording as well, just because this is such a unique year for everyone, but obviously in our world of school psychology as well, that, this year's experience for people is obviously going to be very different, depending on where they're coming from and what their school district was allowing in regards to, virtual assessments versus in-person assessments versus we did record reviews for everyone, And so how are you guys kind of taking that into consideration as you guys are doing interviews this year?
It has been challenging. I've been a part of several interviews virtually just this school year. And it is a little bit hard to gauge someone's personality virtually. I am sure it is intimidating as the interviewee to be doing the interview virtually, but just know that everyone's in the same boat. Particularly if you're coming from grad school and you're about to graduate and move into the school psych world, your experience and internship may be a little bit more limited this year than you would have hoped. And I would acknowledge that in your interview and explain, this has been a tough year. I have not maybe had experience doing this, but I am open to learning new things. I like challenges. I would love feedback and support. So I think by acknowledging that just because of the circumstance, maybe you weren't able to do as much face-to-face or be involved as directly in whatever they're asking you about. But then following up with the excitement to learn and the willingness for feedback, because you're all going to be in the same position. It is what it is. It's a global pandemic, and you might not have had that experience, and that's okay. I would also use that opportunity as a time to ask your district, what type of support do you offer for first-year psychologists in your district? The first year is a steep learning curve a lot of times, and it's going to be important for you to have some type of mentorship, some type of support system put into place to ensure that you're getting the support that you need, so that you can learn. Whether or not you had the experience in internship, it's just going to be important that your districts are providing that type of added support for you. So I would use that as kind of your opening to ask those questions.
When you were talking about doing the interviews on Zoom and how that's obviously, kind of a negative, we're not able to kind of get that personal experience. One of the things I was thinking about, though, because I was involved in some interviews earlier this year, was that thinking you could easily have notes up that like you can't have when you're in a face-to-face interview. You could literally have notes like, Postit notes up right around your computer. And as long as you're still looking at us, I was just like, wow, what a benefit versus what we were able to do, 2 years ago or something like that.
That is a great point. Yeah, and I make yourself a little cheat sheet of the things that you want to hit about your experiences, your interests, what you value, and have that up there so that if you do get nervous, it's right in front of you.
And I think even if someone even acknowledged it, because I know a lot of times people might end with, is there anything else you want to share about yourself to the team or something like that? I think it's nice to be able to like even go and go, let me just double check my list. No, I was able to, oh, yeah. Because I think it also shows that you were prepared,
Yes.
that because it is one of the most, any interview is one of the most like anxiety producing situation. So I think it's nice to see, well, how does someone prepare for that anxiety
Yes.
producing situation there?
Yes. Um, and that is something that I'm looking for when we're interviewing is not only the answers to the questions, but how you're answering the questions and your poise and your confidence and your demeanor. Um, so give yourself a second to breathe after a question is asked and prepare your response, because how someone is presenting themselves in an interview, which is a very high stakes, stressful situation, is indicative of how you're going to handle maybe some of those high stakes, stressful IEP meetings. So that is providing information to me about, um, how you might handle some of those tough conversations and conflicts, and just another piece to the puzzle for me.
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I always think about that piece because yeah, two most stressful conversations going on there, right? The interview and some high stakes IEP meetings that some of us get to sit with. So
Mhm.
um, I'm kind of curious because and again, I don't know exactly how you guys word questions, but sometimes either I've been on the side or both sides of the table of like sometimes there's scenario questions or longer questions. And so, if someone needed something repeated or clarified, I'm assuming that's something that we would be looking for, right? In the same
Mhm.
way of, if we're sitting in an IEP meeting with a parent and they're going on and we just want to clarify, before responding or different things like that, that like those are okay things to do in an interview as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's another thing. Normally, when we have our in person interviews, we'll give our interviewee a list of the questions to reference while we're asking them. And that's some virtually, we're not emailing them over the questions. So that's just another challenge of performing or conducting these interviews virtually. But yeah, if you need something clarified or repeated, please ask for that. I think that shows another level of confidence and ensuring that you are clearly understanding what the question is so that you can answer it as directly as possible.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else or any other tips for someone who's going to be interviewing for a school psych position soon?
I would say do your research. Um, Research the district, research the school, um, just to get an idea of what the population might be, whether it's going to be more Title I families or families that have a little bit more parent involvement, the size of the district, any specialized programs that might be at the school that you're interviewing for. You can look in the directory of the school to see certain positions, to see what support staff are available at that school. That might help you to figure out what the role of that psych is. Um, all that information is going to be helpful for you so that you can compose some clarifying or follow-up questions for the interview team about what may be expected of you as their school psychologist. Um, and make sure that the role that you are interviewing for is going to align with your interests and your values. Because I know I've said this so many times, but we can do so many different things with the school psychology position, which is wonderful. Just make sure that you're applying for a school that would be the best match for you, because that's going to be imperative. And maybe not everything lines up perfectly, but as long as there's opportunity for you um, to participate in whatever it is that gives you all those warm fuzzies, um, ask that. Um, and I would just say what I'm overall looking for in an interview is knowing that the values that that psychologist has are student centered. We are advocates for students, and in my personal opinion, I think that's our number one role in the schools. Um, Being able to work as a team member, and collaborate with not only school staff, but parents, but always having that student's priority as, um, being in the forefront and the number one, priority. Um, so in whatever way you can portray that in your interview, try and make sure that you're working that in, um, and just understand that you're going to be nervous and that's okay. And we know you're nervous, but just, um, as prepared and poised and confident as you can portray yourself, even if inside your heart's beating a million miles a minute, just take those breaths and you'll get through it.
I remember doing an interview earlier this school year, and it was one of the first ones on Zoom. And like the person, like we couldn't hear the person, they had to log out and log back in and all those different things. And it was so amazing because she came back super poised. And I was like, once again, like, all right, there's someone who like knows how to just kind of deal with like really weird situations, because that's like one of the worst things, right? Like you're showing up to an interview and like no one can hear you. And oh my gosh, I have to log out and log in. Like she didn't even look like she was sweating at all. I was really impressed with that.
Yeah.
So just kind of piggybacking on one of the things that you said, I loved how you talked about making sure that that position was aligned
Hmm.
with, with you and your feelings about the role of school psychology, because it is so varied. So I know we talked about earlier about like kind of listening for the questions, because that probably will give you a good insight into the role that they're looking for. And so would it be appropriate then if someone was sitting in a district and the 10 different questions were all about assessment, to maybe ask a question about, I heard a lot of assessment questions. Is that the main role for the school psychologist here in this district? Are there other opportunities? Because again, I know a lot of school
Hmm.
psychologists realize assessment for many roles is a huge part, but if they want to make sure that they get to do the counseling or get to be involved in MTSS, and then none of those questions are around,
Hmm.
I would hate for someone to get into that district and realize, oh, I'm just a testing machine here. I don't
Right.
get to do all those other things.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, especially when you're coming out of grad school, you're just hoping to get a job sometime. But the more that you can match your interests with what that expectation is of that district, that's going to be best for everybody. So I would definitely suggest asking directly. I love it when interviewees will ask me, as I'm usually the only acting school psychologist on the interview committee. They ask me, what does a day look like for you? And so I can kind of share the different roles that I take, in my school, and I think that gives them a clearer picture of what their everyday might look like and what they can, um, be more involved in. And maybe the interview questions are more evaluation heavy and you express interest in MTSS involvement or counseling. And the feedback you get is, we would love that. That's what we're hoping for. So maybe if you're not getting what you think you want out of the questions, asking that directly might be an opening for them to understand your interests, and then you can bring more to that district that they aren't currently accessing.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Brittany, for your time today. And I hope this was useful for everyone who was listening to the replay. So thanks so much, guys.